Today, I have the great pleasure of speaking with Terry Matthews-Lombardo. She's a long-time, very experienced professional in our industry, planning meetings all over the world. But most importantly, she just wrote an amazing book called Meetings Mayhem, where basically she's telling stories of what went wrong and what we can learn from it. I'm sure all of us are going to enjoy a conversation with Terry. Thank you. Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Business of Meeting podcast. And I'm extremely happy today to speak with Terry Matthews-Lombardo. She is a rock star in our industry. She's been doing planning meetings, for many, many years. And she has written the book that all of us wanted to write one day, but none of us did. It's called Meetings Mayhem. And it's all about the things that can go wrong or are going wrong during a project and how you cope with it. Terry, such a pleasure to speaking with you today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Eric. I have a big smile on my face right now when you say that, the book that everybody wanted to write, because I am hearing that from so many people that read it, because obviously the industry is a big market for the book, but it's got a market beyond the industry as well. But so many planners have reached out to me and said, oh my gosh, chapter 6 was great, but I can top that one. Or, oh my gosh, I can't believe chapter 2, and things like that. So I hear you. I know that a lot of people have the same idea, and I welcome everybody's feedback from the book. I think it's great to hear that.
Absolutely. And as I was telling you just before we start recording this, it's type of book that me, like many others, thinking one day we should. And but you're not the one day we should. You did it. So thanks for that. I read it. It's funny. It's stressing. Some of the parts you're reading it. It's almost like a thriller. What's going to happen afterwards? So kudos for that. And I obviously would like to highlight some of the stories in the book. But before we do that,
sure.
Who is Terry, and what is your story?
Oh, thank you for asking. That's interesting. Everybody has a story, as you know, and I think the older we get, we all agree that your story is more important to you and to pass on to your family as well. And I've always prided myself in being a good communicator. So I'm happy to tell my story. I kind of feel like a dinosaur in some sense, in that I actually have a degree in hotel and hospitality management, even though I've been in this industry a very long time. So when I got my newly minted degree, in my head, I was thinking, oh, I'll be a hotel general manager. This is what I'm going to do, even though I knew about the convention industry, but I didn't know that there really was such a thing as meeting planners, event planners, all of that. And so my first job was at Walt Disney World right here in Orlando, where I live, at the Contemporary Resort Hotel, which
love it.
Yes, which I have to tell you, and this is going to date me, but back then the Contemporary Resort Hotel was the largest in the Southeast. We had 1,046 sleeping rooms back then. And of course, many hotels have surpassed that now. But and I can even tell you the rack rates for hotel rooms back then was $45, $55 in the wings, and $65 for the tower that the monorail runs through.
Yeah.
People don't believe me when I say that now, but that's exactly what the prices were.
What were you doing there?
I started at the front desk, and when I left after a couple of years, I was in conventions. And in fact, I was working in conventions when, you might have heard, I'm sure you've heard of the PGA merchandise show. It's one of the largest merchandise shows. Well, we started that at the Contemporary Resort Hotel.
Wow.
Believe it or not, it started as just some tabletop displays. I remember when the PGA people approached us, John Zorak, who's retired, but years ago, he came to us and said, I've got this idea for a little golf show. And all we had was the Ballroom of the Americas. Anybody that's been in the Contemporary has probably been in the Ballroom of the Americas, but that's all we had. And so they were tabletop displays around the perimeter of the ballroom. So to think that now it's grown to, I mean, you know what it's grown to, citywide and the entire convention center. And
it's fascinating to me that you still remember there was 1,046 room. It's
I know
wow.
it, because every time they do renovations at the Contemporary, they'll list how many sleeping rooms are there, and I'm thinking, oh, they've reduced the sleeping rooms because they've enlarged some suites, So I'm still doing that mentally in my mind. So I was always thinking I was going to, stay in the hotel side because I loved it. But after a couple of years at Disney, when I was not promoted to the general manager, which was shocking to me,
Mhm.
I say in jest, I thought, you know what, it's time for me to branch out. And I also, at the time, I got to share this. I felt that Disney was too large of an employer for me. I thought it was a wonderful place to work. And I still tell students and young people entering the industry, especially here in Orlando, because I go out to UCF quite often and
Yep.
the Rosen College and talk to students. I say it's a wonderful place to start your career and get the training from corporate America like that. It's wonderful. There were 7,000 employees back then, and I just felt like a name and a number.
Mhm.
And I mean, which is kind of a joke right now because now there are over 70,000
Wow.
employees.
Wow.
And of course, we all know the success story that Disney has. And
Yep.
I still have many friends that work there. A couple of them actually that came out of my era still. But anyway, after I had a wonderful opportunity to be an international flight attendant and with a private charter. So I took that as a sign to say goodbye to Disney and took that leap of faith, even though it was a brand new startup for a charter airline. But it took me all over the world and back again, including China. I was
Wow.
on one of the first groups, to enter the People's Republic of China back when it was still really communist China. So wonderful experience that was. And then after that is when I got my very first meeting planning job with an association based here in Orlando. And everything else just took off from then. That is also when I joined MPI, which is a big part of my history. We've talked about that, Eric, and a
Yep.
big part of your history too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's fascinating to see in the industry how many people in different organization, association that have gone through MPI, but really changed our lives.
It has. It very much has, for the better. And it's such a sense of pride for any of us who have worked hard in the volunteer positions to see the growth it's taken now and the worldwide expansion. But again, back when I started, I didn't even know the term meeting planner existed. And MPI, in fact, when we formed our Orlando chapter, I was a charter member and a 2-term past president. We literally had to go to our corporations here in Orlando and talk to executive secretaries and talk to administrative assistants and talk to the marketing departments, public relations, wherever people were coming from that were booking the hotels in Orlando. And again, they didn't know they were meeting planners either. So MPI was so instrumental in getting the mindset into the businesses around the world that professional meeting planning is a viable profession, industry, yep. And the rest is history for MPI, of course.
I sometimes have people asking me, but why do you volunteers? Why do you volunteer in organization? What is your answer to that?
Oh my gosh, you get back tenfold what you put into it, even if you only have volunteered on one committee in your local chapter, and it doesn't have to just be MPI. I also have SITE in my history on the board with SITE and committees, and I'm to this day I'm very active with SPIN, Senior Planners Industry Network,
yeah.
which is an up and coming.
Not started, yeah.
Yes, exactly. But it's so much fun. SPIN is so much fun because we're all starting as senior level planners. We're all veteran planners. So it elevates the conversation whenever you start talking to somebody, because you're not in like meeting planning 101. But anyway, to answer your question specifically, you just get back so much more. Just the networking alone helps you increase your own professional network. It's how you learn about other suppliers that can help you, other planners that can help you, other industries. I mean, every time I'm looking for even a DJ in Orlando, Orlando, or a new flower company, or a new supplier to the industry, I just talk to my MPI friends, because
Yep.
there's always, and of course I have a lot of established suppliers I already use here, but it's always great. You can't ever have too many people in your professional network, is the way I look at it. So
I totally agree. And I had the good fortune of planning meetings in over 50 countries in the world. And it was
I saw that.
always local people. I need
Yeah,
to have local partners. If not, it's impossible. You cannot do it.
exactly. Exactly.
So,
And, I'm thinking about your working. I meant to mention that to you, and all those big international programs you did. I'm sure you have a really good story or two to share with me for Meetings Mayhem Volume 2. So you got to be thinking about that, Eric.
with great pleasure. No, it's yeah. Whether it's a volcano erupting in Iceland, I fly to cool with 5 programs the following weeks.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, we all have that. It's but again, to your point, you did read that. You did write this book and collect all of these stories. So when you were doing that, first of all, when did you first had the idea of the book, and how long did it take you to actually execute on it?
To be honest, I would say I was thinking about it for at least 10 years. The thought came to my mind, and I knew some people immediately I was going to approach on their stories because they were incredible. Believe it or not, one comes to mind right now that I didn't even get to complete the interview for this book, but I'm going to try really hard for the next book, because the planner telling me the story had retired, and it was hard for me to get all the facts. But anyway, I'm gonna revisit that for volume 2. But anyway, about 10 years. But again, I was a very active meeting planner, and I still am. So
Mm-hmm.
you're servicing all these clients. I'm also a mother. I'm also have a homeowner, a dog mom, all these things. So you got to start finding how you add another element to your professional goals into your already over challenged life.
Right.
And I started following other writers, and started my own blog, started trying to be regular with that. And when I say regular on the blog, I'm only once a month, but I feel that that's a good niche for me, because a lot of people do blogs daily or weekly, and for me that's too much of an overload. I don't, as much as I
A lot of
love
work.
following some writers, I don't need to hear from them every day. And so for me, I just thought, I want to be out there, I want the presence there, but once a month is fine. So I started that. You tip your toes into a new industry, which writing was for me. I started soliciting magazines. They always say to write about what you know. So I started getting assignments for industry magazine articles, and I love that, and that's still an important part of what I do.
Mm-hmm.
And it's I call it my alter ego in the industry. I think people know me first and foremost as TML, Terry Matthews-Lombardo, and a lot of people, especially here in Orlando, but also around the country, know me as, oh, that Orlando MPI gal. I was 2-term past president. I've served on every committee, including the international board. And so I've got that in my identity, and I'm very proud of that. I worked hard for that. But now I'm also being known as TML the writer. So I like that too. It's my
That's
alter
awesome. Now,
ego.
yeah, and actually, it's a great book called The Alter Ego Effect.
Oh, I
That
didn't know that.
Oh yeah, and it speak about using an alter ego. It's absolutely
Oh,
phenomenal.
I'll have to follow up and
Oh
get
yeah,
that.
a great guy, great book, really. So you had this idea for 10 years. When did you actually say, okay, now I'm gonna do it? When was
Yeah.
that?
I think once I really got serious about collecting stories, I became much more aware once the idea was firmly embedded in my mind. And I think having gone through a lot of these situations that I'd come home and even tell my family, and they'd be like, no, that didn't really happen. No, that's not really what you do. Or, and other meeting planners, you'd get together in network groups, and everybody, you'd be in the lobby bar and they'd say, oh my God, I can top that story. So I started taking notes, and I
Got it.
actually started telling people, you know what? Can I quote you on this, or can I call you and follow up and really write a good story? And everybody said, yeah, sure, we'll share it. So once I got an outline in my mind, which was fairly easy, hey, just have every chapter a new story. And that also makes for a very easy read, I think, too, for a book, because,
It is,
sometimes,
absolutely.
yeah, because you can read a chapter and put it down and pick it back up again and not worry about, where you left off. So I'd say probably 5 years ago is when I got serious about it. And I had an aha moment because the title actually was not credited to me. My working title was something like Disaster at the Convention Center, or something like that. It was a bit longer. One of the first interviews I did for a story was a very, very creative guy who is just a production genius. And he actually submitted the very last story in the book, Dick Wilson. And when I was talking to him about it, he threw out the name. It should be a shorter, catchier name, because that's what he does. He's a wordsmith and producer. And he says something like Meetings Mayhem. And I wrote it down. And that was the aha moment for me. It was so much easier for me to focus on just all the chaotic stories instead of just stories about the convention center, which, like I say, my
Right.
original idea was something like Disaster at the Convention Center. So that kind of catapulted me. And I've heard that from other writers, that you need one thing to focus on, or one kind of aha moment that kind of turns your thinking around. And I, after that, I said, oh, I'm going to town with this. I'm just going to start trying to knock out a story a month and really get the job done.
Good.
And I'd say the main focus of my writing, though, really took place during the pandemic, because as with everyone, we had some downtime, even though I was very fortunate with a lot of my clients that kept going. But there was that first month when everybody stopped. And we really didn't know what was going forward. So you really couldn't do much. You were kind of paralyzed. And I thought, well, what I can do is continue writing. And this is what's going to be my focus right now. And I'm just so happy I did it. And I set a goal for the beginning of the summer for my publication date. And I missed that goal. It was August 1st for my publication date, but I'm still fine with that. It's kind of end of summer.
Mm-hmm.
And we all know you've just got to have goals and deadlines to work on. And so that was really the story of how it came to be. And I still have a stack of stories that the hardest part for me, to be honest, was to find a cutoff point where I felt, okay, Meetings Mayhem, the love is in here now. The editing is done. The word polishing is done. Now I've got to release you to the universe and see if anybody picks up on you.
Yep.
And, the welcome response I've just been overwhelmed with. It's been very humbling. So I'm really proud of that. But I just love the fact when other people say to me, oh, this is the book that I should have written. And I'm like, come on, let's join it. Let's join together and do more like this.
Absolutely.
Because it's a fun read too. And I think we all need, I think we all need more humor in our lives. But, the biggest takeaway, I think, for anybody reading it, whether you're in the industry or outside the industry, is that we can't make this stuff up. These are all true stories.
Yes.
And no matter what happens behind the scenes, or in a couple of the stories, when the curtain goes up, you gotta put a show on.
Even if the floor is breaking up.
Caving in, exactly. Patti LaBelle's story. That was a great one. That's a legend story here in Orlando, by the way. There's so many suppliers that were involved in that.
But the way you wrote it, I can picture it going like boom, and then boom.
People falling, tables falling, chairs falling. Yeah. I'll tell you, one of the biggest challenges for the book actually was trying to find humor in disasters like that. That one was a little bit easier to inject some humor, but like the one chapter about the man who lost his ear, I don't know if you remember that or got to that chapter yet, but that's not really a funny thing. But my gosh, that planner, when she told me that story, I'm like, are you kidding me? The guy lost an ear in his hotel room.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I remember that story. And then they called the security, and basically the guy didn't even remember.
He didn't even remember. He was on a drug trip and he didn't even remember injuring himself. So I had to try and inject a little bit of humor in that, even though that's a shocking revelation. Yeah. But again, Eric, in this industry, I mean, these things happen. This is the
Absolutely.
world of meetings and conventions. And as planners in the industry, we can even only speak to what goes on in the front end or behind the curtain or in the meeting rooms. But
Absolutely.
think about all the stuff that goes on in the hotel rooms,
Oh,
like losing an ear,
yeah.
an attendee losing an ear. And there was another story about Legionnaire's disease spreading in a convention. That's, I think, one of the later chapters in the book.
Mhm.
And submitted from Wendy Porter up in Minnesota. And it was long before
Yeah.
COVID. But again, if you have any history in this industry, you know that we've all heard about Legionnaire disease and
Yes.
dealt with the reality, especially in the cruise lines. And here's a story from a meeting planner who had people die from Legionnaire's disease during her conference. And she
Mhm.
herself got it and was very, very sick. But I had to inject some humor somewhere into it. So it's developing a writing style too. And so I hope that's what I achieved in this.
Definitely. It reminded me of one of our stories where we were in Tenerife for a sales meeting with a medical device company. And long story short, when we were asking for backup during the inspection, people keep saying, "No, it never rains in Tenerife in March."
Famous last words, right? It never rains.
And we're still joking about it never rains in Tenerife with the big smile, which it usually never rain except that day. But that's another story. What is
well,
like
I'm taking notes though. I'm taking notes, Eric.
Oh yeah, I'm sure with with anybody in this industry, we can sit down and can find 10, 15. But what is the one or two stories maybe you can share here on the podcast? So before people buy the book, Meetings Mayhem, what is the one or two that really comes to mind to you?
Wow. Well, I think two in particular, three, are getting a lot of industry buzz because they're just so funny. Chapter 2, called Incentive Perks, submitted by my dear friend Syra Banu up in New Jersey. And it was about an incentive program that she was doing in Mexico. And many of us have done these, and you put your group on a catamaran, and there's drinking involved, and there's scuba diving, and all of that fun for the day. And to be perfectly honest, I have to be careful how I word this, but this involves a man who was very well endowed and got caught in the catamaran as he was laying there face down. A certain part of his body got caught in the catamaran roping, and it's just an incredible story. And
that's how he lost his hairs.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Oh, there's another chapter on a planner who had to, this was a hotel convention service manager in a hotel who was told she had to hire a stripper to get up on the stage during this company's presentation
with the together with the lady speaking
yes
about colors.
So there was a professional speaker already hired, but this company president thought it was going to be really funny to everybody in the audience to have this professional speaker interrupted by a male stripper. The audience was all female. And that just did not go over well at all. And so that was a real fun story. Sharon Fisher from Play with a Purpose here in Orlando submitted that one. And I think the final chapter, Dick Wilson submitted about the swinging convention. And he's the really creative producer I mentioned earlier. And his story was simple, but just amazing, where everything had gone right in rehearsal. A big set on the stage, similar to Hollywood Squares, where you've got people in each of the squares and you've got singers and dancers. Oh, in his case, I think it was singers and dancers in each of the squares going to perform. Big opening number. Curtains open, and the opening song number, the man was supposed to be flying across the stage, but curtain open and he's upside down. And God bless him, he was still singing, but he's upside down and swinging across the stage. And those things really happen. And as Dick pointed out, rehearsal had gone flawless. But again, that's what we all know that happens. things happen.
Absolutely, all the time.
Yeah, so there's a lot of great stories in the book. I don't want to downplay any of them, but some of them are more serious, and some of them are just plain laugh out loud. You can't do anything but
Right.
think.
And
yeah,
the one I was referring to when the floor outside, because
oh yes, the
3 days
floor
of
clink.
rain, floors
Yeah,
starting to crack, the VIP
yes.
and the spouse going
Just
to the hotel with their son, and I mean, it's
yeah,
just
moving the whole event from an outside venue that was just a torrential downfall with the floor caving in, and moving the entire event to a hotel in the blink of an eye.
mhm.
And only a seasoned professional can think that way and think, how can we salvage, if there's anything left of this evening, how can we salvage it?
Yeah.
And I mean, he did call ahead to the hotel to let the general manager know, hey, this is a disaster, but we're bringing them all back to you. And they got pizzas and they got Chinese delivery. I mean, the hotel agreed to because the hotel couldn't possibly serve a dinner. It was just one of those situations for that size
Absolutely.
group. So they did, the only thing they could think of was order a ton of pizzas and order a ton of Chinese takeout, and
Yeah.
went back to the hotel and salvaged. They couldn't salvage Patti LaBelle's performance, though. She was not about to try again with this group, but
Yep. Now, Terry, we were the same generation, and you are one of the rare, I would say, that didn't fall into it, but really went to study.
I did.
To get in our industry. When you think back about all those stories, those horror stories, how can one prepare for that? Is it teachable, or is it more a question of character and how you're going to react to it? What can be learned from it from anybody's joining our industry?
Yeah. That's a good question. And specifically to that, I have made a point of trying to include some learning lessons at the end of each chapter where it was applicable. I mean, sometimes it just, stuff happens and you can't, no matter how many rehearsals you have that go flawlessly, when the curtain opens, things go south. So, but I did try and include, because a lot of planners were very honest about explaining their situation and then saying, man, I really screwed up. And so I'd say, well, how could you have possibly prevented this if you could? So that was important for me to include learning lessons. And so I think when I think back about my experience in the industry, I've grown from every challenge more than I have from the successes.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you have a successful program, you don't necessarily dissect it when it's over and you think, oh, that was great, I'm going to do that again. So as long as my notes are good, next year when we repeat it, we'll just follow A, B, C, D, and E again. But when you have a challenge or a problem or something that really goes wrong, it really causes you to pause and think about the overall situation, pull the team together and say, how can we react to this? And I think, to your point about being a successful planner, how you react, you have a couple of options when some challenge or disaster happens. You can panic and run away from it and probably risk losing your client or your job. Or you can be a bigger person and say, man, I really screwed up, but let me tell you how I'm going to correct the situation. So and it's not always cut and dry. It's not always black and white, but I think the more you work in the industry and the more experience you get, and I think that goes back to having a professional network too. I mean, a lot of planners know, if your AV company fails, what's your backup? You phone a friend and say, oh my gosh, we need AV backup here, or we need to reprint everything overnight, or our entertainer is not going to show up. Who can we call? I mean, those are all the things that you really have to think on your feet on. And for me, a lot of the answers come from a very expansive industry network and calling upon your friends and professionals.
Absolutely. Totally agree with that. I would just add to the point that you made about not panicking. And every time I hear "don't panic," I'm thinking about the Hitchhiker Guide to the Galaxy, when they say "Don't panic."
Oh yeah,
Like one of the sentence. But
yeah.
I remember, for instance, when we saved a life in Sardinia, in an hotel, and we were doing the editing of the movie that was going to be shown to all the sales meeting the next day, and it was probably like 2:30. Went down and to bring some drinks to the team. Lift open, and somebody was bleeding. And I saw in front of me, basically had fall on this head. It was not
Oh my,
even from our group, but long story short, I remember that I went to the reception and the guy said, "Call 911." And he goes, "No, we first need to have a doctor. That's the process." And I look at him, I say, "Fuck the process."
yeah,
And call me now an ambulance.
yeah.
And one ambulance was arriving for actually a lady of another group that has just fall and basically hurt
A
her feet.
minor. Yeah.
And I said, "I'm sorry, this is a question of life and death." We put the guy first. I asked one of the country manager. She was also trained as a nurse, and I said, "What's going on?" And she said, "Well, if we press too much, we risk breaking something or hurting in the brain. But if he
Yeah.
stays like that, the way he's bleeding, he's gonna die."
Oh my
So
gosh.
I just asked, "Can we move it?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "Okay, now we move it." And some people said, "No, you cannot move it." I said, "Listen, I spoke to somebody who's trained for that to the point of your network. Let's put in the ambulance." Put
Yeah.
in the ambulance. I called back our partner who just left an hour before. And I said, "Please call the hospital. Tell them that the ambulance is going to meet another ambulance going up and stop there." And in the middle of the road, we were in the first car, which not really an ambulance, didn't have lights, nothing. They was just supposed to bring to the hospital. And we saw the flash of the ambulance, and far away, we start flashing the light. They
Oh
stop
my.
in the middle of the road. We transfer the guy, save his life.
Saved his life.
We knew we saved his life because the next day he was with a band-aid on his head. He was still drinking again at the bar. Go figure. Yeah. But the
Did he
point
thank
is,
you?
the point is, if you
Yeah.
panic at that time, it's not the time to panic. So
Yeah.
to all the people listening, when you are in this industry, you are the face of the whole team behind the curtain. If you remain calm, then the people will remain calm. And if you make
Absolutely.
decision, they will follow it.
Yeah. It goes back to leadership, right?
Correct.
Who's leading the Titanic? And how are
Yeah.
they going to?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that, to your point, yes, it's the network, and it's also how you behave yourself as a leader and making decision when really it's tough, and then
Yes.
the stakes are high.
I totally agree.
So one of the other thing that I love, and what we were discussing before, you're talking about having a second act and working on a second act. Can you elaborate on that? Because I think it will resonate with a lot of people as well.
Oh, I love talking about that. And I've been doing presentations called What's Your Second Act? And for me, it just came to me one day when I was really focusing on what I call my alter ego as a writer, that's my second act. And the more I got to thinking about it, the more I thought it's really important for everybody, even if you're new to the industry, to have something else to divert you, because you can get so wrapped up, especially as a meeting planner, but also as a supplier, with your deadlines and your sales goals, and it's just all consuming in this industry. Some suppliers never leave their hotels because they're working so many hours of the day, and planners know when you move on site with your meeting or convention, you're just 24 hours a day working. And I just found all of a sudden that when I'd come back and come back to my office after producing a big show or a big meeting, I'd be taking a deep breath and I'd say, I just can't jump into it again so quickly. I've got to just refocus on something else. And for me, it was my writing. And so that's when I started developing the blog, Terry's World Travels, I call it. And I, again, write about what you know. So I was traveling the world and I'm working meetings, and a lot of people don't understand what that's like to work meetings. So I try to, focus the writing to give a little bit of an insight into the daily life of a meeting planner, so to speak, but also traveling and the ins and outs and ups and downs with a focus on business travel, because there's a lot of travel sites out there for leisure travelers and family travelers and moms that travel and all that, but I think there's not as many about business travel. So I tried to hone in on that particular aspect. But to refocus on the second act, I don't think you have to be any age to do it. Like I say, I think even if you're new to the industry, you should also always have something else that really you're passionate about. And for me, it's always been reading and writing. So it took me a while to start developing the alter ego or the second act. And by no means is it ever going to surpass my love for meeting planning. But I love focusing on it, and it really gives me great joy. And especially, I can say during this times we've been through of the pandemic, or as I like to use the French term, the le confinement, as you know, they keep referring to it as le confinement. I think that sounds so much better than the lockdown. And it's given me great joy to focus on that, and not just the book, but the writing in general. And so I call it my second act. And then I've started doing presentations on it to try and help other people, guide them to finding out some other passion they have in their career journey. And it may be competitive with what you're already doing, or it may be very complete. It may bring you full circle. It may just be a spin-off. Maybe you're a caterer and want to start a cake decorating business or a chocolate business. Or, maybe you're a meeting planner and you want to start speaking to the industry about meeting planning, all kinds of things like that. So I just feel it's very important to have a second act at any stage in your career path.
It's awesome. By the way, you keep talking about alter ego, and I mentioned the book from Todd Ehrman. It's also something I strongly recommend anybody to read, because that's how you use the alter ego to basically overcome hurdles or fears that you have in your life. So that's
a very important thing, to overcome the fear you have. If it's a fear of speaking or a fear of starting your own business. I mean, I can't tell you how many meeting planners that have worked for corporations or associations for a number of years, and they come to me and say, Terry, how did you make the leap into independent meeting planning? Because I did it back at a time when that term wasn't even out there, independent meeting planner. I just knew that it was going to work for me. I knew I had a few clients that probably I could service. And I kind of, created what I knew was going to be my future as a meeting planner. It's just so important to know when you're ready to take the leap. You have to do some research. You can't just quit your job and hang up a sign that says, hey, I'm doing this now. You've got to be strategic about it. But I think that's part of what you learn as you go through any job or career path.
Absolutely. And whether you like it or not, because that's one of the things I'm doing is coaching business owners. People, for whatever reason, when they start their independent meeting planning, they don't consider that they have a business. It's just
true.
And it's fascinating to me. It even if you're one person, it is a business. There's finance implying that.
Yeah.
Besides the marketing, the sales, it's the finance, it's the vision, it's how you build a team, it's how you manage your time.
Exactly. I am one person. People are often amazed when I say that. I'm one person. My business is me and me alone. But I have a team of people I pull together when I'm working a meeting or a convention. And again, I'm humble about every one of my clients. Some of them have me do full service, do the site selection, do the program management, book the speakers, put the registration packets together. Some of them just hire me to manage their special events or their food and beverage. One of my biggest clients every year, that's all I do for them is manage, because it's a huge convention. So only managing food and beverage is a huge part of that.
Absolutely.
So I'm not so humble that I'm certainly not below that when somebody calls and says, will you just do this portion for us? And I think that's really important, especially if you're starting out new with any kind of business, is, don't just focus on what you want the business to be, focus on what you can provide your client base, and be willing to stand in the hole and do whatever it takes to keep the client's vision.
And by the way, when you know what you want your business to be, then you can decide what type of service you want to provide, at what price, and for how long, and with which team.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, that's the biggest question I get from other planners who are just starting out. How on earth do you know what to charge? And I'm like, honestly, that's a pretty easy thing to figure out. People get all excited about it, but it's pretty easy to figure out. If you have experience as a planner, and someone comes to you with a project to take over, in my mind, I have to be able to calculate about how many hours this is going to take of my week. It may take a 40-hour work week. It may take 10 to 20 hours per week for 4 weeks or something like that. But you have to start on your pricing. You have to know, of course, what your value is, but everybody thinks, nobody thinks they're paid enough, right? Nobody thinks they're paid enough. So you have to get over that ego part of it. And you have to look at your last full paying job, is the way I always try and relate everyone back to. What was your salary in your last job? And what did that amount to on an hourly basis? And that's kind of an aha moment for a lot of planners, because I mean, they may be making 60,000 or 100,000, whatever, but they've never broken it down to a 40-hour work week. And we know nobody works a 40-hour work week, but that's what corporate America bases your salary on, right?
I remember a very well-known business maverick in Belgium, and there are not many of them, was actually interviewed when France came out with the 35 hours per week law. And he was asked, what do you think of that? And he said, I'm all in favor. And people said, what? He said, yeah, 35 hours per week. My weekend start on Tuesday night.
Oh, I love that. I love that.
Terry, I could speak hours with you. I just love the time we spent together. Once again, Meetings Mayhem, wonderful book, a lot of great stories, and the book that everybody wanted to write, but nobody did besides you. So congratulations on that. Before we part ways for today, how can people get in touch with you? What is the name of your blog, and what all your information?
Oh, thanks for letting me give that little pitch. My blog is Terry's World Travels, and you can find it really easily. If you get the book, I list all of my contact information in the book. I answer my phone when people call. I know that shocks people, but I have a great short story to end with on the phone situation. I answered a phone call a couple of years ago, and it was someone who, a former client, but I'd only done one program with them, and it had been a year or two ahead of that. They called me one day and said, Terry, could you go to Singapore in a couple of weeks? And I said, sure. And I mean, it was an amazing thing. And yes, I was filling in for somebody else who had to drop out at the last minute, but that got me halfway around the world to see something I'd never seen before and experience something I'd never seen before. So I'm pointing that out specifically because I answer my phone. 407-492-4004 is my cell. My email, tml@cfl.rr.com. And Terry's World Travel is my blog. Again, everything is listed in the back of Meetings Mayhem. And just a couple more quick things. Meetings Mayhem is available everywhere books are sold. And I'm really proud of that, because I did not just go with the Amazon printing route. I went with worldwide distribution. And so it's available on Barnes and Noble. It's available on Target online. It's available through independent bookstores. You can search online through bookshop.org and order it through your local bookstore. So I'm really proud of that.
Congratulations. Once again, Terry, thank you for taking the time, and looking forward to meeting you live in the future.
Thank you so much, Eric. I really appreciate this opportunity. Make some mayhem now. Go out and make some more mayhem.
Right. Terry, thank you so much for joining me today on the Business of Meeting podcast. Love your story and your stories in your book, Meetings Mayhem. Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to connect with me, please go on LinkedIn or reach out to www.evenbusinessformula.com/group. And if you enjoy this podcast, please share it with your network and let me know anything or anybody that you think I should be interviewing in the future. Thank you. Bye-bye.